So, my guest today is Will Burns, and Will is the founder and CEO of the virtual idea generating company called Ideasicle. He's been running that for about a decade. He's been doing that about as long as I've been running this other company. But before that, like me, he was on the agency side of things, and he's worked with some of the best known, most creative agencies in the business, like Wieden Kennedy, Goodby Silverstein and Partners. Those guys, and Arnold, which is where I met him when I was running business development for Arnold's media sister agency, then known as NPG, now known as Havas Media. And he was running, among other things, business development for Arnold. So it was always a pleasure to work with him. And I'm really happy to be welcoming him back today. Hi there, Will. How are you?
Hey, Jody. Thanks for having me on.
One of the things I think that we both wanted to talk about was the idea of creativity around how agencies can use their ideas to position themselves well. So let's just start with that, because I think that it does start with positioning. And you had some really interesting thoughts around agency positioning, and maybe even drawn from your experience working on the agency side, but now as an idea generator. Tell me what you see around agencies that don't position themselves well, and maybe some that do, what the difference is.
Yeah, it's sort of ironic because agencies, the number one piece of advice they give their clients is you can't be all things to all people. But when it comes to their own agency, they have a really hard time not trying to be all things to all people. And so that's the first thing. If I'm working with an agency, I'll try to point out that, stop saying things like everything under one roof. We can do it all. We'll full service agency. That's all fine, but it's not a point of view. Like, I'm not going to hire you for that, because you're admitting that you're a commodity. So what is it about your culture or about your belief system or about how you think about advertising that is different? Because if you can articulate that in a powerful way, then it can become the prism through which you communicate your RFPs, the presentations, how you talk about the same old stuff that every other agency has to talk about in a pitch. Now you're talking about through that prism of that big idea, that point of view. And as a result, the same old stuff sounds really fresh to a client because you're talking about it differently.
Yeah, I talk about that with my clients as well. And sometimes it's, I find that it's kind of a deceptively simple shift away from talking about yourself to talking about the client. But it's not even talking about the client, because, I've actually seen agencies go overboard that way too, where they're like, okay, we learned our lesson. We're not going to talk about ourselves at all in this pitch. We're going to learn everything about the client. And we're going to go in and we're going to become 100% client centric. And the clients walk away saying, we learned nothing about this agency. And they told us a lot of stuff that we already know. So I often say it's this magical hybrid of describing your capabilities within the prism or within the context of the client situation, the client needs.
Yeah. To that point, and just to build on that, you want the client to think you know something that other agencies don't. And if in the pitch process, it's so early in the relationship, you could do all kinds of robust research and you still, to your point, won't know as much as the client does. So you won't even impress them if you knock it out of the park in that regard. But if you can project a knowing of something about the industry that becomes your obsession as an agency, now you're interesting. Now a client is like, whoa, these guys seem to be on to something here. I want to learn more about that. And then you got them listening.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a question. Sometimes what I'll recommend, I'm interested in knowing if you validate this or if you think that maybe I'm not on the mark. So I hope you'll be honest with me. But what I'll often tell my clients is, I think that marketers, that their clients, that their prospects are willing to give an agency the benefit of the doubt if they. So, like, let's say I'm going to take a really broad, made-up example. Let's say you're known for consumer packaged goods, but you want to go into automotive. So you know nothing about automotive or know little about automotive. But what you do know is a lot about selling to new families, I don't know, again, making
Yeah,
this
sure.
up. So if you know how to sell, I don't know, furniture or packaged goods or to new families, then how do you apply that knowledge, what you know about those ideal customer or those target customers to how you're going to how that you can help that automotive maker sell to families? And so you can go in there saying, look, we don't know that much about automotive. We don't claim to, but what we do know are these things. And here's how our experience could help you. And so even if you're off the mark a little bit with that client, I think that most marketers really appreciate it because now, again, within the context of their issues, you're telling them about how you can solve problems. And yeah, so they're learning about you through that prism. What do you
Yeah,
think?
and hopefully, even if you don't have category experience, if you've got the client buying into this way of looking at the
Yeah.
world or looking
Mhm.
at the advertising world or the profession, and they're intrigued by that, then they may give it to you that you may not know their industry
Yeah.
per se, but they want that secret weapon anyway
Yeah.
because they want it applied to their business. Plus, a lot of clients don't necessarily want people in automotive, say, that are only automotive people
Right.
because they end up with the same old stuff all the time, and that
Yeah.
that can lead to sort of insular thinking. I mean, it does help. I have to admit, you do want to have some category expertise when you're pitching, especially. And that's
Yeah.
easy to get. I mean, you can freelance that with my company. I've got all kinds of different expertise behind. That's easy to get and sort of frankly easy to fake sometimes because you can do research to really sound smart enough so that the client is listening to your recommendations.
But actually, this kind of segues to a story that you were telling me that I'd love you to share again for the sake of our vast audience and those watching the recording. Tell me a little bit about that pitch that where you got yourself, when you were at Arnold, got yourself invited and what you did. And I'll let you sort of tell the story and the client and stuff.
Yeah, so I was reading Adweek one day and I noticed in a big headline that the RadioShack business was $250 million piece of business at the time, was in review, and that
I
they
wonder
had.
how many people watching this were like really Radio
I
Shack.
know, right?
Yes, Radio Shack was a very important retailer at one point in time.
Yeah, no kidding. Some people probably don't even know what the heck we're talking about. Who's RadioShack? But anyway, I had read that they were in review and there were 20 agencies in the RFP process. I saw the name of the pitch consultant in there, and I was kind of miffed because Arnold was well known at that time for dusting off, you know, well, dusty old brands
Yeah, like
like,
Radio Shack was starting to they were like sort of on their
yeah,
little bit, yeah, they were
you've
not
got
quite on the top
questions, we've
anymore.
got answers. That was their
Mm.
campaign at the time. And so I was like, we're perfect for this business. I'm going to send them a letter and see what happens. And I did a little research. I didn't do a lot of research, but just enough to be sort of dangerous. And I saw, I forgot to tell you this yesterday, but I saw a TV spot on YouTube for a Rugrats wall clock.
Mm.
And at the end, it says, "You've got questions, we've got answers." I'm like, oh my God, why nobody has questions about a Rugrats wall clock? Okay. So in the letter, it was a little stinging. I was like, the
Mm.
problem with Radio Shack is that you're not relevant today. You're trying to be a big box retailer in a small box. What if you flip that around? What if you decided that, wait, we're small for a reason? What if we're in neighborhoods for a reason? What if all the things that you currently perceive as negatives about Radio Shack, we could turn into positives? And so that was, and then of course I made a little pitch about Arnold and how we're good at dusting off old brands and stuff like that. I
Mhm.
sent it to them, and as fate would have it, as the cosmos in its majesty would proclaim, the very first, apparently they got like 100 letters like mine, um,
Wow.
from ambitious new business people. On the very top was mine, and they read it just on a whim, and it hit them right
Yeah.
between the eyes, and they're like, oh boy. So we made it into the pitch because of that point of view, and we ended up winning the
Mm.
business, and largely because of the tone we set. It was really fascinating study. because Arnold was not known as a risk-taking agency. It was sort of a middle of the road, very good, very
Yeah.
buttoned up,
It's when, like, you're
pretty.
really making headlines for the VW work, but
Yeah, yeah. But we weren't like Crispin or anything like
yeah,
that. We weren't like wacky, crazy. Not that I have a lot of respect
yeah,
for Crispin. Don't get me wrong.
sure.
But this letter, because it was kind of coming out of nowhere and took a point of view and tried to hit him right between the eyes and did set the tone for the rest of the pitch. And it turns out that the committee that was reviewing the agencies at the end, they all had a scorecard,
Yep,
relationshiping, the
yep.
work, the strategy, the people, the blah blah blah, and we lost. But in the end, the CMO went away for a couple of days to think about it and gave us the victory because, and this is a quote, close. Um, Arnold is the one I want to get into the trenches with. So that
Yes.
whole letter, not only in the campaign we ended up presenting, came right out of the spirit of that letter. It turned out, but that letter kind of ended up being the roadmap to victory. So it was crazy. It was crazy. It was cool.
Can I unpack that? Because there are a few things. Hopefully I remember them. But number one, there's a difference. So you didn't go in and create spec work and say, let's do a bunch of let's stay up all night or work all weekend and come up with some beautiful designs to get their attention. But you did come in with some original thought. But I mean, how long did it take you to going back to what were talking about before? It was thought from a perspective that Arnold was already taking about how you revive dusty brands. Tell me a little bit about like coming up with some of those ideas.
Well, that was just what we were known for. So to me, that
Mhm.
justified the letter and it
Okay.
justified the tone of the letter.
Yeah.
And I'm probably communicating it in a way that sounds way more angry than it actually was. It was a very, polite, nice letter.
Yeah.
I have it on my website
I
somewhere.
love the fact it had a strong point of view, and I love the
No,
fact that
but
there may have been a little scolding.
no,
That was
totally.
brave.
Totally. And this is a tactic. This is a nice little tip for small agencies that if you see what I would call a marketing crime out there,
Marketing.
um, send them a letter.
Yeah.
Get your team together for 1 hour,
Mhm.
brainstorm ideas because you know way more than you think you do about everything in the advertising business. It amazes me how agencies, when they're in pitches, they feel like they need to go out and do research to figure out what they already know.
Yeah.
Um, trust your guts and write a point of view and send it to the CMO or the CEO or whomever. I've done that in the past and posted blog posts that basically say, here's what the crime was. Here's the brief that
Yeah.
I would put a team on if you were to hire us. And call to action. If anybody knows anybody at this place, please send this to them. And I actually
Yeah.
did get, I mean, the odds of success are very low, but what the hell?
What have you got to lose? Right.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Then that's
I
how I
think
felt about the RadioShack letters. Like we're already not in the pitch. What are we going to be
yeah.
less in the pitch if I
Right.
send this?
So then the way you want it, well, there are probably lots of things that you did to close the deal. But you know, one of the things I wanted. So when you were talking about how you won it and how you scored low, but the CMO was like, I want to be in the trenches with those guys. The first thing I thought, I got a little bit nervous because I thought, oh, what's going to happen is people listening to this are going to be like, yeah, chemistry, that's what wins the day. And I've developed a real problem with this notion of ultimately it's about the chemistry because I think that chemistry, yeah, you want to have a good working relationship. But you know what? I also think that you can be the biggest jerkwad and come in with a brilliant idea. I mean, lots of really obnoxious creative people have won business because they're freaking brilliant, right?
Yeah.
Not bad because there's good chemistry. So I caution agencies about, well, we just have to get in the room and we'll show them how friendly we are. But what you also did do, what I also think agencies do that I can drive me nuts, is well, I'm guessing, but I'm assuming you also didn't go in and say, hey, look, we are courageous and we're going to work hard and we're reliable and all those things that you want in someone who you are in the trenches with. But rather than say that, I bet you demonstrated it from the very first with writing that letter. And so you allowed you demonstrated and you allowed the CMO to draw their own conclusion. I want to be in the trenches with them, rather than saying, you want to be, we'll be in the, like, we're going to be a great trench bait. So like there's a difference. So show, don't tell. Allow your clients to create that, build an impression, allow them to reach their own conclusions.
Yeah, and I think chemistry is only part of it, and probably not
Mhm.
the most important part of it. To me, what we showed was potential. We showed that we could be scrappy, that if we saw something, we would go after it. And they were in a bare knuckles war
Yeah.
in retail, and kind of struggling for their lives. They needed a fighter. You know what I mean? They
Mhm.
needed somebody who was going to have a strong point of view, is going to be able to help them through the ups and downs of retail. So
Right.
while the chemistry with our team and theirs was very good, I'm sure it was really good with Chiat Days and Carmichael Lynch and whoever
Yeah.
else was in the pitch. I can't remember. But to the point about chemistry, just one quick aside. I
Yes.
find that, and this is a nice tip for smaller agencies too, that chemistry with a client starts with the chemistry between your team. If
Yes,
if
I
if
agree.
you're all getting along and you're all kind of finishing each other's sentences, even cutting each other off or busting each other's chops in the middle of the
Yeah.
meeting, then you become a club that the client wants to be a part of.
Yeah.
And that it can be very powerful too. But to me, the Radio Shack thing was much more about, it wasn't so much about chemistry, which to me is sort of superficial. It was
Yes.
about the potential that we just oozed on behalf of their business.
It's funny, like a sad story. We lost, this is when at MPG, we actually lost uh, the a pitch for Cadbury because we showed such bad chemistry among ourselves
Hmm.
in the meeting. So, we submitted the initial RFI response, and we went in as the favorite. And so I'm going to give myself and my team pat ourselves on the back, because a lot of it was me and my new business colleagues saying, what kind of response can we create that's really going to show them how much we want this business. And then I think we felt there was so much at stake that, unfortunately, I guess everyone was a little bit anxious. And I actually wasn't in the room, but I remember hearing about it afterwards. And I remember the search consultant on that one. She was like, "What happened?" But yeah, rather than finishing each other's sentences, people were cutting each other off and like giving them like dirty looks because they were going on too long. And
Oh God.
oh my God, it was so painful. And anyway, yes. So yes, the chemistry between the team. And so I guess it's also, wow, we're really also going off on tangents. I guess it's also where a leader, whether in a bigger agency that might be someone like you or me in the new business role, or in a smaller agency like the CEO or someone, it could be junior too, but someone has to be willing. It's like the emperor has no clothes, willing to go in and say, we need to do a better job of looking like we are a cohesive unit, or the cohesive unit that we are, and maybe challenge top leadership to take a step back and get better at that. What do you think?
No, I think that's true. In fact, you wrote a great post a month ago about democracy versus dictatorship in a pitch.
Right.
And it really resonated with me because I used to use those exact words in describing a functional pitch team.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that, and what I think you meant by that is, when you're in a pitch, you have deadlines, and they are hard deadlines. They are not movable. And so you got to have the ideas when the
Mhm.
presentations come. So let's be democratic. Let's have our brief. Let's come up with ideas. But as soon as we've got one that we like, then it's about beating that idea. This is the idea until we come
Yeah.
up with something better. And it takes that kind of leadership to pin that idea up there and say, okay, you can keep coming up with ideas, but if you don't beat that, we're, uh,
Yeah.
we're going in with that idea. So it's a combination of, yes, bring the ideas in, but then you got to make a decision. Because
Yeah.
if you go in mealy mouthed or political and worried about what other team members are going to think, it's not about that. It's just about winning the pitch. All you
Right.
got to do is focus on winning the pitch and having the best idea you can possibly have. And that requires democracy to a point, and then dictatorship to get it
Mhm.
over the
Yes.
end zone.
So we're already 25 minutes past the hour, and you
Oh my
can talk
gosh.
about ideas. So I want to segue there. You often perfect segue ideas. So ideas for a pitch, ideas for client work. You know, you started a business to help in agencies and in-house agencies as well as independent agencies or out of house agencies develop ideas. Talk about that a little bit about, like the pressure that sometimes agencies feel, especially in a new business situation, and how your approach helps to alleviate that a bit or a lot.
Yeah. So agencies, it's not unusual for agencies to bring in freelancers when they have
Mm.
pitches because everybody is stretched too thin,
Yeah.
especially these days, and it seems to get worse every year. What I've created is a virtual access to tier one creative talent that these are all
Mm.
people that I met at Wyden Kennedy, Goodby, Arnold, Mullen, all
Yeah.
these different places. They're all awesome freelancers. And we've got about 40 plus of them now. And what an agency can do is subscribe to Ideasicle X and run their own idea projects through the platform. It's super easy to do. Or just call me and I'll do it for you. And I'll come back to you in 3 days with 20 plus
Yeah.
ideas that can jumpstart your pitch. Because the hardest part, especially when your team is strapped, is coming up with that original germ of an idea that could lead to something. Well, what
Yeah.
if you had 20 of them or 25 of them in 3 days? Now you're starting with something and not starting with nothing. And so I would have loved to have this tool back when I was
Yeah.
at Arnold just to get the team moving more quickly. Because again, it comes back to not having enough time.
And it's not necessarily replacing the team. I asked you this yesterday. Are there creative teams that feel like this is sort of stepping on toes a little bit, that you're sending idea generators into their territory? How do they feel about this?
Yeah, I mean, no different than they would if they brought in a freelance team. I mean, those
Yeah,
people don't
it
work
happens all
with
the
the
time.
agency either. And our agenda is not anything but help them win the pitch. And if it means they outsource these ideas, they are still the curators. They're still the boss.
Right.
They still
Yeah.
decide which ideas are going to go in with, and the creative process will continue from what we give them, which is just the germs of the ideas. They will then go have fun with it and make
Yeah.
it their own.
Well, it's a little bit like that idea that the idea that ideas could come from anywhere, and it's the talent is really in recognizing them and then growing them, building on them.
Yeah,
It
they're
can
like energy,
Yeah.
and if you
Yeah.
resonate with it as a creative team, it's like, ooh, then all of a sudden you've got all the energy you
Yeah.
need to develop it.
Do you think it also helps that your team, I mean, they're under a certain amount of pressure, I know, because your clients are paying you to come up with ideas with a certain amount of time, but it's probably a different type of pressure than, say, an in-house team feels when there's a big pitch on the line. Um, does that help where there's a little bit more sort of psychic freedom
Well,
amongst your team to think big?
versus an in-house agency?
Yeah, versus that creative team versus, the CEO going to the creative team saying, "The pitch is in 2 weeks. Come up with a brilliant idea."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's sort of like a race. When you're in a pitch, it's more like ideas for sport. You know what I mean? As opposed
yeah,
to for your job. You're
yeah,
in the Olympics and you have to
yeah.
beat Russia
Mhm.
at idea generation. With in-house agencies, it's actually a different dynamic because they're not competing against others. They just need ideas for a campaign, and they
Mm.
might not even tell their clients, their in-house clients, that they're using us. Because we're just there to try to support them to make them look good. So they go in. I don't care if they say that they came up with all of those ideas that they present. We're just there to help. And so the in-house
Yeah.
agency dynamic is slightly different, and a little bit more guarded. But they know that we're not a threat. We're not an agency of record. We couldn't possibly. We don't execute the ideas, so we're not a threat to them. But we can get them the outside perspective that they need.
Right. And you work with both in-house agencies as well as non-in-house agencies, but is it true that you work with more in-house agencies than not? That they've really embraced this idea?
Yeah, it's sort of a sweet spot for Ideasicle X. Again,
Yeah.
because if you're a creative team or even a creative department within a company, then you're only thinking about that brand every single
Yeah.
day, and the thinking can get quite insular.
Yeah.
So having a Ideasicle X where you can throw a project out to us and have us think about it, we're
Yeah.
not in the day to day. then it gives them that outside perspective that they might not otherwise have gotten, and in
Yeah.
a very non-threatening way.
It's interesting. This is maybe not necessarily what like folks who are listening to this are going to really want to take away from this, but what you're also telling me is that this idea of the in-house agency, and it's probably here to stay. I mean, everything's cyclical in our business, but it's here to stay for a while longer, certainly. And they're learning the leaders, the people who are running these in-house agencies are learning how to both, get the job done, sort of have smooth, efficient operations, which is one of the big benefits of an in-house agency. But also, they've discovered resources like yours to tap into those big ideas from people at ex Wyden people and ex Arnold people, and that's interesting. I think that's certainly an important thing for smaller independent agencies to be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, in-house agencies are cool now.
Yeah.
They it used to be, 20 years ago, a creative director at Arnold would say, "I will never get caught dead in an in-house agency. It's
Yeah.
like where creatives go to die,"
Hmm.
that kind of thing. But now some of the
Yeah.
best creatives are chief creative officers at CVS, at
Hmm.
Staples, at these big retailers, big brands.
Yeah.
It's kind of a cool place to go now, and I
Yeah.
mean, that is the trend. I think it's like 70 or 80% of corporations in America today have
Yeah.
in-house agencies, and that was
Yeah.
40% like 10 years ago.
Yeah. And again, it's not to like deliver bad news to all you agencies out there, but I do think that, the more that you're aware that that exists, then the easier or the better you will be able to position yourself against that. Because I also do think that there's a lot of room and still an important place for the independent agency.
Yeah,
Um,
especially
mm,
if they can position themselves in a way that is
yeah,
not threatening to the
comes
in-house agency.
brings us right back to the beginning, right? It's really about that positioning. It's really about that ability to open the door to sort of wedge your way in with a strong positioning statement, and then also be disciplined and have it to back it up and demonstrate it. But
Yep,
what are you going to do to get yourself noticed? Yeah.
exactly right.
Gosh, Will, this happens all the time. I feel like with a half an hour, 30 minutes has just like flew by. In fact, we're over 30 minutes. But tell us a little before we go, because I know folks need to, if you're here in the East Coast, people are getting back to their afternoon work. If they're on the West Coast, they're starting their morning. If they're in Europe, they're already like maybe watching this over a glass of wine. But tell us a little bit more about Ideacycle X and how an agency might work with you and how to get in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. So you can find us at ideasiclex.com. And there are two ways to engage with us. Typically, agencies use us in pitches, but we've also been used on existing client business. They don't often tell their clients they're using us, but that's cool.
Yeah.
If they need some outside perspective, that's a way to do that. But in a pitch situation, I have a product designed specifically for agencies called Jumpstart, and it's a 3-day gig. You call
Hmm.
me, brief me, I'll brief the teams, I'll recruit the team of 4 people. They all work together as a team, 4,
Yeah.
world-class creatives
That you
chomping
pick,
on
that you
ideas
choose.
on the platform. And then after 3 days, we'll have, maybe 30 or 40 ideas, and I'll invite the agency into that idea stream where they can
Yeah.
go peruse through all the ideas exactly as they were posted
Hmm.
and find the nuggets that they want to take to presentation. So
Interesting.
yeah, so that's for age. But what you can also do if you want to is just call me and I'll do it for you and come back to you
Yeah.
with a nice tight presentation. But it's a lot more expensive.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, but they get this raw, like sort of the raw output, which is a beautiful thing. That's really great.
Yeah.
I think my team member Megan is probably in the background there. So Megan, when you have a moment, just throw up. I think you've got Will's information. Just throw up. There we go. So you can email Willby at ideacycle.com or visit ideacyclex.com. Well, Will, I have I've always admired you ever since I've got to know you at
Oh, right back
at
at you.
Arnold, and I think it's been really fun to watch Ideacycle grow and evolve and its success, and I think you have so much to offer folks. So I hope that everyone will take advantage of the opportunity to talk to Will and see what they can do for you.
Thanks so much,
So
Jody.
thank you, and thank you, folks, for those of you who are here today and who are watching the recording. Thank you for tuning in.